Wisdom seekers, let me ask you something profound. What if I told you that the most formidable power you possess doesn't require strength, physical combat, or even a raised voice? What if the greatest victory you could ever achieve against an enemy is to dismantle them piece by piece without ever drawing a sword, throwing a punch, or entering a battlefield? Throughout history, warriors and kings sought to conquer lands and enemies with brute force. But there were others, thinkers, strategists, and philosophers, who recognized the deeper truths of conflict. They understood that real power lies not in overpowering someone with violence, but in undermining them silently, methodically, until they crumble by their own hand. As the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." And yet, when an enemy stands in your way, threatening what you hold dear, is there a way to triumph over them without compromising your own principles? In today's journey, we will explore the 10 ways to destroy your enemy without fighting them. These are not methods born of anger or hatred, but rather of wisdom, foresight, and mastery over the self. Wisdom seekers, your support means everything. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and consider using the thank you feature to make a donation. Every like, subscribe, and donation helps us continue our mission of sharing knowledge. Ready to unlock more wisdom? Let's get started. Way 1. Master the power of indifference. Wisdom seekers, there is an art, an ancient power, in mastering your own reaction. Your enemy thrives on conflict, on dragging you into their arena of chaos. They crave your anger, your frustration, and your fear, hoping to unbalance you and control the situation. But what if, instead of playing into their hands, you remain completely unshaken? Imagine standing face to face with someone who insults you, hoping to provoke an emotional response. They want to see the fire in your eyes, hear the sharpness in your voice, and feel your energy clash with theirs. But instead, you give them nothing. You are a mountain, unmoved by their winds of anger, frustration, or malice. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus often taught that our emotions and reactions are within our control, while the actions and words of others are not. If you allow someone's words to disturb your peace, you have granted them power over you. But if you master the art of indifference, you deny them that power entirely. Indifference is not just a passive state, it's a calculated act of strength. When your enemy realizes that they can no longer provoke you, their frustration will turn inward. Every insult, every scheme will dissolve into impotence because they will see that you are untouchable. This method has been practiced for centuries. Take Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic Roman emperor who led armies and ruled an empire, all while maintaining a calm mind. In his meditations, he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Aurelius knew that the greatest battles were not fought with swords, but within the mind. His indifference to external chaos was his true armor. By mastering indifference, you force your enemy to fight an invisible opponent, your inner calm. And when they can no longer shake your foundation, they are left powerless, their attacks echoing into a void. This is the first and perhaps most potent way to destroy your enemy without fighting them, by making them realize that their actions have no effect on you. In today's world, where social media and daily interactions often invite us to react instantly to provocations, mastering indifference is more relevant than ever. Every comment, insult, or provocation that comes your way is an opportunity to practice this discipline. The more you can control your reactions, the less control your enemies have over you. The beauty of indifference is that it not only disarms your opponent, but also frees you from the weight of unnecessary emotional turmoil. The silent power of indifference is like an invisible shield. Your enemy will hurl their sharpest words, their most cutting actions, but nothing will penetrate. They will exhaust themselves trying to provoke you, and in the end, they will defeat themselves. Way 2. Starve them of attention. There is a deep psychological truth that humans, no matter how much they may deny it, crave attention. Your enemy is no different. Whether through praise, fear, or even hatred, they want your eyes on them, your mind focused on them. In fact, attention is often the lifeblood of conflict. But what happens when you strip that away? What happens when you deprive your enemy of the very thing they thrive on? To understand this strategy, we must first grasp the power of attention. Attention is a form of validation. It says, "You matter enough for me to focus on you." And this validation can be more addictive than any drug. Even negative attention, your anger, frustration, or fear, feeds your enemy's sense of power. They know they are occupying your mind, controlling your focus. But when you starve them of attention, when you remove yourself entirely from the narrative, they are left with nothing. Their power begins to crumble because it is built on the foundation of your engagement. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "The longer we dwell on our misfortunes, the greater is their power to harm us." In the same vein, the more attention you give to your enemy, the greater their influence over your life. By ignoring them, truly and completely ignoring them, you take away their ability to influence your world. This is not a strategy of passive ignorance. It requires active mental discipline. You must train your mind to detach, to no longer fixate on the words or actions of your enemy. It's not just about refusing to engage in outward arguments or conflicts. It's about removing them from your internal dialogue altogether. Imagine a tree that grows stronger the more sunlight it gets. The more attention you give it, the more it flourishes. Now imagine cutting off that sunlight, depriving the tree of its nourishment. Slowly, its leaves begin to wither, its growth stunted, until it eventually dies. This is the same effect when you starve your enemy of your attention. They begin to wither under the weight of their own irrelevance. This tactic works on multiple levels. First, it creates a vacuum in which your enemy no longer has control over your emotions or thoughts. They become powerless because they are no longer the center of your focus. Secondly, it causes them frustration. People who seek conflict often thrive on attention, and when they don't get it, they grow agitated. Their energy turns inward, and they begin to unravel. This can be particularly effective in personal or professional settings. Imagine a toxic colleague who constantly seeks to undermine you. Every jab they make, every underhanded comment, is designed to draw you into a confrontation. But what happens when you refuse to respond? When you simply carry on with your work as though their words had no impact on you? They will grow increasingly desperate for your attention, and as you continue to withhold it, they will ultimately undermine themselves. The world of social media offers an immediate example of this principle. When you engage with trolls or negative commenters, you're giving them exactly what they want: your time, your attention, your energy. But when you ignore them, when you starve them of the response they crave, they lose their power. The fire of conflict dies because it has no fuel to sustain it. Starving your enemy of attention is a subtle yet profoundly powerful way to destroy them without fighting. It's not about avoiding conflict, but about refusing to acknowledge that the conflict even exists. Over time, this approach drives your enemy to a point of internal defeat. They may try harder at first, raising the stakes, but eventually they will tire themselves out. By denying them the validation they seek, you leave them alone in their battle, and without an opponent to fight, their energy dissipates. They crumble not because of any action on your part, but because their own need for attention goes unfulfilled. In the end, this form of quiet, deliberate inattention can be one of the most effective ways to dismantle an enemy from within. Way 3. Understand and exploit their weaknesses. Wisdom seekers, imagine this. You are standing on the brink of battle, but instead of rushing forward blindly, you pause and study your opponent. You observe their every move, notice the slight hesitation in their stance, the uncertainty behind their eyes. In that moment, you realize that their strength is nothing but a facade, a mask hiding their deepest vulnerabilities. Every enemy, no matter how powerful they appear, has weaknesses. The key is to recognize them and subtly exploit them without ever engaging in direct conflict. Sun Tzu, the master strategist of ancient China, emphasized, all warfare is based on deception. But what if, instead of deceiving your enemy into fighting, you deceive them into defeat without ever raising a hand? Your enemy's weaknesses can come in many forms: emotional, psychological, intellectual, or even moral. Perhaps they have a fragile ego that cracks at the slightest hint of criticism, or maybe they are driven by uncontrollable greed, constantly seeking to gain more at the expense of others. Maybe their weakness lies in their impatience, their inability to wait and think things through. Whatever their weakness, It's your job to discover it and turn it against them. This tactic requires a deep understanding of human nature. The Stoic philosophers believed in the importance of self-reflection and understanding both your strengths and your limitations. But this principle applies equally well to your enemy. By studying them carefully, you gain insight into what drives them and, more importantly, what can break them. Let's take, for example, an enemy who is driven by pride. Their need to be seen as superior, as infallible, can be their greatest undoing. You don't need to confront them head-on. Instead, you can subtly feed that pride, encourage them to overreach, to make mistakes driven by their own ego. And when they do, they fall, not by your hand, but by their own hubris. Or consider an enemy who thrives on conflict. Their need for constant confrontation is their weakness. Instead of giving them the fight they desire, you remove yourself from the battle entirely. You create situations where they are forced to confront their own frustrations, their own need for control, until they are consumed by it. There's another important lesson here from Stoic philosophy: the idea that we often suffer more in our minds than in reality. Your enemy's weakness often exists in their own mind, shaped by their fears, their insecurities, and their misguided desires. By understanding and exploiting these internal weaknesses, you can bring about their downfall without ever having to fight. Psychologically, people are often their own worst enemies. By subtly directing them toward their own weaknesses, you create a path for them to destroy themselves. It's a method of destruction that leaves you untouched, above the fray, while they unravel from within. Imagine playing a game of chess. The goal isn't always to strike immediately or to rush your moves. The true masters of the game position their pieces, anticipate their opponent's next move, and exploit their weaknesses slowly and methodically. The enemy falls not because they were outpowered, but because they were outmaneuvered. The same principle applies to real life. When you know your enemy's weaknesses, you can set the board in such a way that they have no choice but to walk into their own defeat. Whether it's in business, relationships, or personal rivalries, the ability to understand and exploit weaknesses allows you to win without ever engaging in direct conflict. This is a long-term strategy, one that requires patience and insight. But when done correctly, it is one of the most effective ways to destroy your enemy without fighting them. It's a quiet, psychological warfare, where the battlefield exists not in the physical world, but in the minds and emotions of your opponent. Sun Tzu said, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." This is the essence of understanding and exploiting weaknesses. You let your enemy defeat themselves, and in the end, they will never see you as the cause of their downfall. They will be too consumed by their own failings to realize you had orchestrated their destruction all along. Way 4. Control the narrative. There is an ancient power in storytelling. Wisdom seekers throughout history, great empires rose and fell, not just by the strength of their armies, but by the strength of their narratives, the stories they told about themselves, and the stories they told about their enemies. Your enemy, no matter how strong they seem, is vulnerable to the narrative you create about them. By controlling the story, by shaping the perception of others, you can dismantle their reputation, their influence, and their power without ever engaging in a direct confrontation. One of the most profound examples of this comes from the Roman statesman and philosopher, Cicero. When Cicero found himself up against the political machinations of Catiline, a would-be usurper, he didn't attack him with swords or armies. Instead, Cicero used the power of rhetoric and persuasion. He gave a series of speeches, now known as the Catiline orations, painting Catiline as a traitor, a threat to the Roman Republic. With every word, Cicero controlled the narrative, shifting public perception until Catiline was defeated not by force, but by the weight of the public's disapproval. You too can use this strategy. In every conflict, there is a story waiting to be told. If you allow your enemy to control that story, they will position themselves as the hero or the victim, rallying others to their cause. But if you take control of the narrative, you can frame them in a way that strips them of power. The key here is subtlety. The goal is not to engage in blatant slander or lies, but rather to shape the truth in a way that highlights their flaws, their weaknesses, their errors. You don't have to openly attack them. Instead, let the story do the work. A well-placed rumor, a carefully crafted piece of information, can spread like wildfire, and soon your enemy finds themselves trapped in a narrative they can't escape. But it's not just about the story you tell others. It's also about the story you tell your enemy. By controlling the way they perceive the situation, you can manipulate their actions. You can make them believe they are winning, when in reality, they are walking right into a trap. Think of this like a chess match. In chess, the greatest players don't just think about their own moves, they think about the story their moves tell their opponent. They create a narrative on the board that convinces the other player they are in control, only to reveal at the last moment that they have been manipulated into a losing position. This is the power of narrative in conflict. It allows you to destroy your enemy without ever fighting them because you make them believe they are already lost. In modern life, controlling the narrative is more relevant than ever. With the rise of social media and constant connectivity, perception often becomes more powerful than reality. The way others perceive your enemy can determine their downfall. If you can shape public perception, or even just the perception within your own circle, you wield a weapon far more powerful than any physical force. Remember, words are weapons too, and stories can be as sharp as swords. By controlling the narrative, you turn the battlefield from a place of violence to one of perception, where your enemy is defeated not by your hand, but by the weight of their own reputation crumbling beneath them. Way 5. Let them overextend themselves. There is a natural law, wisdom seekers, that governs conflict and struggle. Those who push too far, too fast, often destroy themselves in the process. Your enemy, in their eagerness to defeat you, may overreach, becoming overconfident and careless, and it is in this overextension that their downfall lies. This concept is not new. The ancient Greeks understood it well, particularly in their stories of hubris. Hubris, or excessive pride, often led the mightiest heroes and kings to their doom. Think of Icarus, who, in his overconfidence, flew too close to the sun, only to have his wings melt, sending him plummeting into the sea. This same principle applies to your enemy. When someone is too confident in their power or ability, they often make reckless decisions. They believe they are invincible, that they can achieve anything without consequence, and that is where they are most vulnerable. Instead of confronting your enemy directly, let them overextend. Encourage their overconfidence subtly, and watch as they take on too much. They may spread themselves thin, lose focus, or make crucial mistakes because they believe they are unbeatable. Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's greatest military leaders, met his downfall precisely because of this overextension. After conquering much of Europe, his ambition led him to invade Russia. He believed his armies were unstoppable, but the Russian winter and the vast distances proved to be his undoing. His forces were decimated, not by direct confrontation, but by the harsh realities of his overreach. You can use this principle in any conflict. Whether in business, personal rivalries, or social situations, allow your enemy to overextend. They may take on too many projects, too many battles, or too many enemies. Their ambition will blind them to their limitations, and they will begin to falter. Patience is key here. It's a waiting game. You must resist the temptation to engage them immediately, and instead give them the space to make their own mistakes. As they overreach, their resources, energy, and credibility will diminish, and when they are at their weakest, you can make your move, or perhaps by then, you won't even need to. In letting your enemy overextend, you are practicing what the Stoics call apatheia, or the state of being unaffected. You are calm, watching from a distance as they burn themselves out. Your silence, your patience becomes your greatest strength, and in the end, your enemy will fall not because you fought them, but because they fought themselves. Way 6. Turn their strengths into weaknesses. Wisdom seekers, we all have strengths, and often our enemies seem powerful because they possess certain strengths that we don't. But what if I told you that even their greatest strengths could become their greatest weaknesses? It's a paradox, but one that has played out time and time again throughout history. To destroy your enemy without fighting them, you must first understand the duality of strength and weakness. Every strength, when pushed too far, becomes a liability. This principle is ancient and profound. The philosopher Aristotle said, "Virtue lies in a mean," meaning that every quality, when taken to an extreme, turns into its opposite. Courage becomes recklessness, confidence turns into arrogance, and strength can lead to vulnerability. Take, for example, an enemy whose greatest strength is their intellect. They are sharp, quick-witted, and always ready to outmaneuver others in conversation or debate. At first glance, this seems like a powerful advantage. But what happens if they begin to rely too heavily on their intellect? They may become overconfident, dismissive of others, and prone to overthinking. You can exploit this by introducing complexity into situations, making them second-guess themselves, or by playing into their ego, making them believe they are the smartest in the room until they make a crucial mistake. Similarly, an enemy whose strength lies in physical prowess or intimidation may fall into the trap of relying too much on force. They might believe that every problem can be solved by aggression, by overpowering their opponent. But physical strength, without strategy, leads to predictable actions. You can exploit their reliance on brute force by staying one step ahead, using their strength against them, much like a skilled martial artist uses the energy of their opponent's attack to throw them off balance. In ancient times, the Athenian statesman Pericles understood this principle well. During the Peloponnesian War, Athens was up against the might of Sparta, whose strength was in its unparalleled military discipline. Instead of engaging them in direct conflict, Pericles used the strategy of asymmetry. He built long walls around Athens, relying on their superior navy to provide supplies, effectively turning Sparta's military strength into a weakness. The Spartans, unable to breach the walls or maintain a prolonged siege, found themselves at a disadvantage. You can employ this tactic in your own life. Let's say your enemy's greatest strength is their ability to charm and persuade others. They are a master of influence, always winning people over. But this strength can also become a weakness if they become complacent, believing they can manipulate any situation. By maintaining your integrity and sticking to the truth, you can expose their manipulation, slowly eroding the trust others place in them. Even in business or professional settings, a competitor may have certain strengths: financial power, a strong network, or a recognized brand. But those very strengths can blind them to changes in the market, new technologies, or shifting consumer preferences. While they rest on their laurels, you can innovate and move in directions they never anticipated, turning their advantage into a vulnerability. This strategy requires patience and observation. You must study your enemy carefully, identifying not only their weaknesses, but also their strengths. Once you see how they rely on those strengths, you can subtly create situations where those very qualities become liabilities. It's like pulling the thread on a sweater. One small tug, and the whole thing unravels. The key here is subtlety. You are not directly attacking their strength, you are allowing them to fall victim to it. When they overextend, over-rely, or overuse their strongest traits, they leave themselves exposed. And when that moment comes, you can act decisively, exploiting the weakness they never even realized they had. Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, wrote, "Appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend. March swiftly to places where you are not expected." By turning their strengths into weaknesses, you create a situation where your enemy is constantly on the defensive, always reacting, and never anticipating your next move. In this way, their greatest asset becomes the source of their downfall. This method, like many others in the art of indirect conflict, is not about force, but about strategy. By understanding the dual nature of strength and weakness, you can dismantle your enemy's power piece by piece, without ever engaging in a direct fight. Way 7. Sow doubt in their mind. What if I told you that the most powerful weapon in your arsenal isn't a sword or a fist, but a seed? A seed of doubt planted in the mind of your enemy. Doubt is a silent destroyer, working from the inside out, eating away at confidence, decision-making, and resolve. If you can cause your enemy to doubt themselves, their actions, or their motivations, you can defeat them without ever lifting a finger. The philosopher René Descartes famously said, "Doubt is the origin of wisdom." While this is true in the context of self-reflection and growth, doubt can also be a tool of destruction when wielded against an opponent. When doubt enters the mind, it disrupts clarity and certainty, creating hesitation and second-guessing. How do you plant this seed of doubt in your enemy? It begins with subtle, seemingly harmless actions. Perhaps you challenge their assumptions or question their decisions, not in a confrontational way, but with carefully placed comments or questions. Are you sure that's the right move? I heard someone else was going a different direction. Do you think this will work out? These small nudges, if done correctly, will cause your enemy to pause and reconsider their path. Over time, the doubt grows. They begin to question themselves, their capabilities, and their judgment. The more they doubt, the more paralyzed they become, unable to act decisively. And the more indecisive they are, the easier it is for you to outmaneuver them. One of the best examples of this strategy comes from the ancient Greek military leader Alcibiades. During the Peloponnesian War, Alcibiades had a knack for creating internal discord among his enemies by spreading doubt and mistrust. Whether through rumors, manipulation, or clever rhetoric, he would sow seeds of doubt among the ranks, causing his enemies to question each other, their strategies, and their alliances. This discord weakened them from within, leaving them vulnerable to external defeat. In personal or professional settings, sowing doubt can be equally effective. Imagine a competitor who is always confident, always sure of their next move. You don't need to confront them directly. Instead, you introduce subtle doubt into their decision-making process. Perhaps you mention that the market is shifting, or that their strategy may not be as effective as they think. Over time, they begin to lose faith in their plan. As they second-guess themselves, their progress slows and their effectiveness diminishes. Even in relationships or social situations, doubt can be a powerful tool. If your enemy thrives on their reputation or influence, you can undermine that by subtly questioning their credibility or intentions. I'm surprised they're handling things this way. Do you think they're really up to the challenge? These kinds of comments, spread among others, can create an atmosphere of uncertainty around your enemy, causing them to lose the support of those around them. Doubt, once planted, grows silently. Your enemy may not even realize it's happening. They'll continue to operate as if everything is fine, but inside, their confidence will begin to erode. They'll start to hesitate, to question their decisions, and in doing so, they'll become their own worst enemy. This strategy works because it plays on human psychology. We all have moments of doubt, moments where we question whether we're on the right path. By amplifying these moments in your enemy, you cause them to lose focus and clarity. And when they lose focus, they make mistakes. They act out of fear rather than confidence, and in doing so, they defeat themselves. Sowing doubt is a long game. It's not about immediate results, but about gradually weakening your enemy's resolve over time. The more they doubt, the more vulnerable they become. And when the moment is right, you can strike, not with force, but with precision, capitalizing on their weakened state. It's important to remember that doubt, once introduced, is hard to remove. It lingers, festers, and spreads. Your enemy may recover from a physical defeat, but the mental toll of doubt can last much longer, leaving them uncertain and hesitant in future conflicts. In this way, sowing doubt can be one of the most effective strategies for destroying your enemy without fighting them. Way 8. Create confusion and chaos. Wisdom seekers. There is a concept that many great strategists have relied on throughout history: confusion and chaos. In the heat of battle, the most dangerous environment is one where nothing is certain, where plans fall apart, and where the enemy cannot find their footing. This chaos disorients them, causes fear, and ultimately leads to their downfall. But what if you could create this chaos in your enemy's mind, in their world, without ever engaging in physical combat? The Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu once said, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." This principle is the cornerstone of the strategy we will discuss here. By creating confusion in your enemy's life, whether in their plans, their relationships, or their sense of stability, you can lead them to destruction without ever facing them directly. One of the most well-known practitioners of this method was the Roman general Fabius Maximus. During the Second Punic War, Fabius faced the formidable Carthaginian general Hannibal, who was known for his brilliant military tactics. Instead of engaging Hannibal head-on, Fabius used a strategy of delay and confusion. He avoided direct conflict, instead harassing Hannibal's forces with small skirmishes, cutting off supplies, and disrupting his plans. Hannibal's army, though strong, became confused and disoriented, unsure of where the next attack would come from or how to respond. Fabius's strategy became known as the Fabian strategy, a model for how to win through confusion and delay rather than through outright confrontation. In modern life, creating confusion and chaos doesn't necessarily mean launching skirmishes or cutting off supplies, but it does mean disrupting your enemy's plans in subtle ways. If your enemy is a competitor in business, for example, you can create confusion by spreading misinformation about market trends, introducing uncertainties that force them to rethink their strategies. If they are constantly reacting to new, uncertain information, they won't be able to focus on their own goals. Over time, this confusion will lead to mistakes, and those mistakes will lead to their downfall. In personal rivalries, chaos can be introduced by manipulating the social dynamics around your enemy. Perhaps you subtly turn their allies against them, or create misunderstandings that cause conflicts within their inner circle. When your enemy is dealing with internal chaos, they lose the ability to focus on you or your actions. They become consumed by the drama and confusion around them, leaving them vulnerable to further manipulation or defeat. The key to this strategy is subtlety. You don't want to cause outright chaos that is easily traced back to you. Instead, you want to introduce small disruptions, minor confusions that gradually build up over time. Your enemy should never realize that the confusion is being orchestrated by you. They should believe that it is simply the result of uncontrollable circumstances. Confusion weakens resolve. When your enemy is unsure of what is happening or what will happen next, they lose confidence in their decisions. They begin to doubt their actions, hesitate to make bold moves, and eventually, they stop acting altogether. They become paralyzed by uncertainty. It's important to remember that chaos and confusion don't just affect the mind. They affect the emotions as well. A confused person is often a fearful person, and fear is a powerful tool for manipulation. When your enemy is afraid of making the wrong move, they are less likely to make any move at all. This hesitation is what gives you the upper hand, allowing you to outmaneuver them without ever engaging in direct conflict. As Sun Tzu wrote, "In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity." By creating confusion in your enemy's world, you create opportunities for yourself. Opportunities to act decisively while they are lost in the fog of uncertainty. Way 9. Let time be your ally, wisdom seekers. In the battle between you and your enemy, time is often the most underestimated force. Time can erode strength, dissolve power, and bring clarity to confusion. In many cases, the best way to destroy your enemy is to simply outlast them. The Stoics were masters of this understanding, emphasizing patience and endurance over rash actions. As Marcus Aurelius once said, "Time is a sort of river of passing events, and strong is its current. No sooner is a thing brought to sight than it is swept by and another takes its place." But what does this mean in the context of defeating an enemy without fighting them? It means understanding that many battles are won not through force or immediate action, but through the patient, deliberate use of time. Time is your greatest ally if you know how to wield it. Think of it this way. Every enemy, no matter how powerful, has limits. These limits may be physical, emotional, or psychological. They may be hidden beneath layers of confidence or strength, but they are there. And time, if used properly, can expose and exploit these limits. Consider a common scenario. An enemy who is hasty, eager to achieve victory, constantly moving at a fast pace, always trying to outmaneuver you quickly. They may seem unstoppable, but their speed is also their weakness. Over time, they will burn themselves out, make mistakes, and reveal their vulnerabilities. You, on the other hand, remain calm, steady, and patient. You watch and wait, knowing that the longer the game goes on, the more the odds will tilt in your favor. In the political sphere, this is often seen as the art of waiting out your opponent. If an adversary is driven by ambition, they may take risky or impulsive actions in the short term to achieve their goals. These actions, while seemingly successful at first, often carry hidden costs that accumulate over time. By remaining patient, you allow these costs to build up, eventually crippling your enemy. Take the example of Nelson Mandela during his time imprisoned by the apartheid regime in South Africa. His enemy, the government, believed that by isolating him, they could weaken him. But Mandela understood the power of time. Over 27 years in prison, he remained patient, allowing the tide of public opinion to shift. He knew that the moral decay of the apartheid system would eventually be exposed by time itself. When he was finally released, he emerged not weakened, but stronger, having allowed time to do the work of destroying his enemies without ever needing to raise a hand in violence. The key to letting time be your ally is patience, a virtue that the Stoics held in the highest regard. Epictetus, one of the great Stoic philosophers, wrote, "No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me that you desire a fig, I answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen." This applies to the destruction of your enemies as well. You must be willing to wait, to allow events to unfold naturally, knowing that time will eventually wear them down. Perhaps your enemy is overconfident, relying on their current position of power. But positions of power are never eternal. They shift with time, with changes in circumstance, or with the inevitable forces of aging, fatigue, or shifting alliances. Patience is not passivity. It does not mean sitting idly by and waiting for fate to do the work. Instead, it means actively managing time, making strategic moves when the moment is right, and allowing your enemy to make mistakes as they rush to victory. It means keeping a long-term view, understanding that battles are not won or lost in a day, but over weeks, months, or even years. Let's say you're in a professional setting, dealing with a rival who is constantly pushing, always trying to undermine you or get ahead. Instead of reacting impulsively, you focus on steady, consistent work. You maintain your integrity and avoid making rash decisions. Over time, your rival may experience burnout, make enemies, or lose the respect of others due to their aggressive tactics. While they falter, you remain standing, not because you fought them, but because time worked in your favor. In relationships or social dynamics, time also reveals true intentions and motivations. If someone is trying to undermine you, their facade may hold up for a while, but time has a way of revealing hypocrisy, deception, or weaknesses. You don't need to engage directly with them. You simply need to let time expose them for who they truly are. The Stoics also remind us that time itself can heal. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What we do now echoes in eternity." The actions you take in the present, grounded in patience and wisdom, will bear fruit in the future. Meanwhile, your enemy, caught in the whirlwind of their short-term ambitions, will find themselves undone by the very forces they thought they could control. So let time be your ally. Understand its power, respect its flow, and know that those who rush, who act impulsively, will eventually fall victim to its slow and relentless march. Your enemy may seem invincible today, but in time, all things change. And when they do, you will be there, patient and ready to act when the moment is right. Way 10. Master yourself to master your enemy. We arrive now, wisdom seekers, at the final and perhaps the most profound way to destroy your enemy without fighting them. It is the culmination of all the strategies we've discussed, the ultimate key to victory, mastering yourself. The great Stoic philosopher Seneca said, "He who is his own master is the master of all." This is not merely a platitude, but a powerful truth that, when fully understood, reveals the path to defeating any enemy. If you can master your own mind, emotions, and actions, you will find that your enemies lose their power over you. They cannot manipulate, control, or harm you because you are in control of yourself. This principle is rooted in the Stoic idea of autarkia, or self-sufficiency. The Stoics believed that true strength comes from within, from the ability to remain unaffected by external events, including the actions of your enemies. Marcus Aurelius famously wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." What does it mean to master yourself? It means cultivating an unshakable sense of inner peace and self-control. It means not allowing your enemy's provocations to dictate your actions or emotions. It means remaining calm in the face of adversity, unmoved by insults, attacks, or attempts to undermine you. This is perhaps the most difficult of all the strategies to implement because it requires turning your focus inward. Most people are reactive, responding to their enemies out of anger, fear, or frustration. But the Stoics teach us that true power lies in not reacting at all, When you can maintain your composure, your enemy loses their hold over you. They cannot win because you refuse to play their game. Consider how powerful this is in practical terms. Imagine an enemy who is constantly trying to provoke you, to make you react in anger or fear. If you respond, you give them power. You become entangled in their web, allowing them to dictate your actions. But if you remain calm, if you refuse to be provoked, they are left with nothing. They grow frustrated, unsure of how to handle someone who cannot be manipulated. This doesn't mean ignoring your enemy or pretending they don't exist. It means facing them with a clear mind and steady resolve, understanding that their power over you is only as strong as the power you give them. By mastering yourself, you disarm them entirely. In his letters, Seneca writes about the importance of tranquillitas animi, or tranquility of the soul. He believed that true wisdom comes from maintaining an inner calm, no matter what storms may rage around you. This is the essence of mastering yourself, remaining calm in the midst of chaos, unshaken by the actions of others. This self-mastery also extends to your desires and ambitions. Often our enemies gain power over us because they can exploit our own desires or weaknesses. If you want something too badly, whether it's recognition, power, or revenge, your enemy can use that against you. They can manipulate you by dangling your desires just out of reach, forcing you to act out of desperation or impatience. But if you master your desires, if you learn to control them rather than let them control you, your enemy loses this leverage. You become untouchable, invincible, in a way that no external force can break. The Stoics taught that desire is the root of much suffering. By eliminating unnecessary desires, you free yourself from the chains that bind you to others, including your enemies. This is why self-mastery is the final and most important way to destroy your enemy. It is the foundation upon which all other strategies rest. If you cannot control yourself, you will always be vulnerable to the actions of others. But if you achieve mastery over your mind and emotions, your enemies will find themselves powerless to defeat you. And so, wisdom seekers, we return to the wisdom of the ancients. The greatest victories are not those won on the battlefield, but those won within. When you conquer yourself, you have already conquered your enemies. They may still exist, they may still act against you, but their actions will no longer have any effect. You are beyond their reach, a master of your own fate. In the end, the most profound way to destroy your enemy is to realize that there is no external battle to be fought. The true battle is within, and when you win that battle, you have already won everything. Conclusion: the path of wisdom. And so, we come to the end of this journey, wisdom seekers. We have explored 10 profound ways to destroy your enemies without ever engaging in direct conflict. These strategies, drawn from the deepest wells of Stoic wisdom and ancient philosophy, remind us that true power lies not in force, but in subtlety, patience, and mastery over oneself. To destroy your enemy without fighting them is not a simple task, nor is it one that can be accomplished through brute strength. It requires wisdom, foresight, and a deep understanding of human nature. Whether through understanding their weaknesses, leveraging alliances, mastering patience, or achieving mastery over yourself, you hold the keys to victory. Remember, as the Stoics have taught us, the most important battles are not fought in the external world, but within our own minds and hearts. The enemy we face is often our own ego, desires, and fears. By mastering these, we become invincible, not just to our enemies, but to the chaos of life itself. Wisdom seekers, may you take these lessons to heart, applying them not only to your conflicts, but to every aspect of your life. The path of wisdom is not always easy, but it is the surest way to true victory. Thank you for walking this path with me today. Until next time, may you remain strong, wise, and unshaken by the world around you.